All right, let's do it for real. I'm still Davey. This slide deck was made as though it would be the very first thing we did. That is still Seth. And who's ready to learn? Gosh. Class, man. So, you want to be a front-end developer? Are you aware that front-end development is basically the topic of this boot camp? Are you in the right place? Yeah? Maybe? Guess what? This is about front-end development. What does that even mean? The one on the right, right? That's the front end. Front and back end, is that what we're talking about? All right, well, to get even more help from Google Images, it looks like front-end developers make flat, pastel-colored things for desktops, laptops, and mobile devices. Sometimes with logos floating around the laptops. So that's pretty exciting. Let's have a closer look at those logos. HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. What do these three things have in common? What do they have in common with each other that they don't have in common with these? What do the ones on the left have in common that the ones on the right do not? The ones on the left are front end, but that's not the answer I'm looking for. What do you think? Yes, sir. The ones on the left make stuff that you can see. We already gave you a sucker, but hey, have another one. The only one who participates in this class. He's going to have so many suckers by the end. Web browsers, right? They know just what to do with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. They don't know what the crap to do with Ruby, Python, PHP, .NET, and Java. Java and JavaScript, same thing, right? Heck, fire, no. Different things. So one possible definition of the front end is that it consists of anything that web browsers can interpret without any extra help. If you want a more technical definition, the front end refers to things that run on the client as opposed to the server. But we're focusing on the web for right now, so for our purposes, the client is the web browser. Wait, slow down there, Grandpa. What's this web business? We just know about the Snapchats and the Yik Yaks. It's web. What's this web thing? It sounds like something for old people, like 30-somethings. Ugh, gross. Well, what if I told you that your beloved Snapchat was delivered over that very same infrastructure that we call the World Wide Web? That's right. So let's talk a little bit about how this World Wide Web works, and soon you will know as much as this stock photo model, and as much as this guy who thought his Palm Pilot and bulky cell phone and 45-pound CRT displays would look cool much longer than they did. But he also thought he'd have hair a lot longer than he did. But anyway, when you visit a website, you type a URL or a search term into your browser, and that sends a request from your computer to that big cloud we call the internet. More specifically, a little corner of the internet called the World Wide Web. Sooner or later, it reaches a server. And the server then does who knows what. It could be doing anything. It could just grab a file from the file system and send it right back to you, or it could run an entire application written in Python, Ruby, or Java, or C#, .NET, or something else. Backend development is writing all the stuff that runs inside the question mark block there to process the request. But sooner or later, it sends back a response to the machine that sent the request. And this response could contain almost anything, a zip file, an error page, whatever. But most of the time, it's one of the handful of things that your browser can read without any additional software. Chiefly HTML, CSS, or JavaScript. So again, the server might be running some Python application whose output happens to be HTML, CSS, or JavaScript, or it may just be pulling an HTML file off the file server that matches the path that you sent. A backend developer is going to take care of all that. We don't worry about it for right now. They just make sure that what gets sent back eventually is the stuff that we build. HTML, CSS, or JavaScript, or cat pictures. But that's pretty much all your web browser understands. It could also be video or audio, but if your web page autoplays that crap, then you are basically summoning the devil like Mr. Spock here. Your guess is as good as mine. But it's probably HTML, CSS, JavaScript, or Lil Bub. And only one of those things is a programming language. No, Lil Bub isn't a programming language. It's JavaScript, your new best friend. Front-end development is building all the stuff that gets sent in the response in this HTTP request cycle. All the stuff that web browsers will interpret and display. Yes, including dear old JavaScript. You want to learn more about JavaScript? Yeah, that's right. Why? I have it on good authority that JavaScript totally sucks. Over 2 million results for JavaScript sucks. And look down here. Casey, what's his face there? He's a master programmer, it says. And he doesn't mince words. Why do people hate it? Because it sucks. Silly question, right? Sucks so much there are 2 million pages devoted to its suckitude. So why use it? Reason number 1. You don't have a choice. It's the only programming language that these bozos understand. If you want to do front-end programming on the web, JavaScript is still the only game in town. Yeah, you could write Elm, TypeScript, Dart, or CoffeeScript, or something else like that, but only because those ultimately get turned into JavaScript, the only thing that really works. Reason number 2, it's actually pretty good now. Here's a little secret. These 2 million results, they're from when we put this together last year. Now, we're down to 1.5 million. But seriously, all the top 6 results from last year were actually saying that JavaScript sucks. But look at these. The first one is from whydoesitsuck.com, a site where everything sucks. And even they hedge by mentioning JavaScript's bright future in the title. A terrible language with a bright future, which is actually a pretty fair description of JavaScript. The next result is Your Language Sucks, a wiki page that lists what sucks about every programming language you can think of. So the top 2 results are from sites that could easily be the top 2 results for any language. They're not specific. The next one says that learning JavaScript sucks. Probably because the author didn't learn it from Seth and me. But he says that's awesome that learning JavaScript sucks. People complain that it's hard to learn JavaScript now basically because it's improving so rapidly, and there are a ton of frameworks that are constantly changing. But that's a nice problem to have. You can't just learn one library or framework and think that you've learned all you'll ever need to know. Now it's just like all the other programming languages in that respect. So that's okay. The next one, the author of this post is a huge proponent of learning JavaScript. The word sucks appears twice in the post, once saying that it's possible that your local job market sucks, and the other one saying that a lot of JavaScript training sucks. But again, he's never been to extern boot camp, so, you know. The next one says that if you hate JavaScript, it's due to ignorance. Number 6 is from Reddit, so let's not take that too seriously. But anyway, nearly all the comments on that link are saying that the article is a load of this emoji right here. And as the comment that's excerpted here says, OMG, I don't understand JavaScript, therefore it sucks. So see, that's why the word sucks appears there. Not because it actually does, but because it's ridiculing people who think it does. So a lot has changed in the last year. It is true that a lot of programmers despise JavaScript still, but in many cases it really is because they don't take the time to actually learn it. There were some unfortunate decisions made early on in JavaScript's history that we still have to deal with. And it does say something that one of the most popular books on the language is called JavaScript, The Good Parts. And it's not very thick. But a lot of people just don't like JavaScript because it's not language X. It's not whatever they're used to. For example, JavaScript is a semicolons and curly braces language. And we've seen those before. That's C on the left, Java in the lower right. JavaScript looks kind of like those. Unfortunately, it doesn't actually work like those. And if you've been writing JavaScript since even the early 2000s, never mind the mid-90s, then you remember a time when it was truly miserable to work with. Last year sometime, Twitter released a tool where you could look up your very first tweet. Miles here is my business partner, and this was his first tweet. That was 9 years ago, when hating JavaScript was still pretty reasonable. And I think even he would admit that he hated it in large part because JavaScript isn't Ruby, and Ruby was what he wanted to be writing. So have I scared you away? Who wants to learn JavaScript now? Still in? What? Oh, yeah, we're still in. Sure, there were over 2 million pages saying it sucks a year ago, but there were over 9 million results for Star Wars sucks. So Maybe don't listen to people on the internet. Listen to your Uncle Dave, he won't lead you astray. So, how did we get here? Come with me on a magical journey to 1989. Nintendo released the Game Boy, the Berlin Wall came down, Batman and Indiana Jones ruled the box office, and they never made another Indiana Jones movie. Ever. Never happened. I still had hair. And at the CERN Particle Physics Laboratory, future home of the Large Hadron Collider, this guy, Tim Berners-Lee, created the World Wide Web, and with it, the HTTP protocol and HTML. He created it for sharing scientific documents in hypertext, the HT in HTML. What's hypertext for? What's it do? What's the point? What's the whole idea? It allows documents to link to one another. And that's still fundamentally what the web is. Only those linked documents can contain a lot more than just text. But in the beginning, there was only hypertext. Fast forward to 1991, when they made the last Terminator movie that anyone would ever make. I still had hair. Who can tell me what game I'm playing there? Who can tell? Which one? Who knows? Who can see? Who can see in that little corner? You can see a little bit of the TV up there. Yeah, it's the third one, Super Mario Brothers 3. Gosh darn right. Thank you, Evan. And thank you, Just John, for being brave enough to guess. Oh, there's going to be a lot of sniffles in the afternoon recording. Apologize for that. Anyway, I still had hair. It was 1991, and good old Tim made his creation available to the world with a humble newsgroup post. He launched it with a light mode browser that ran on pretty much anything, as well as a browser with a graphical interface and a built-in WYSIWYG editor. Who knows what WYSIWYG stands for? Yes, sir. What you see is what you get. In other words, as you typed it out, you didn't have to necessarily look at the source. It looked the way it would appear in the browser. This browser with the built-in editor was called World Wide Web, later renamed Nexus. And it was written in Objective-C and ran on NextStep, the operating system for Next workstations. The brainchild of this turtleneck-wearing cusser had been fired from Apple. But Next computers were really friggin' expensive and not all that widely used. Aww. Cool, crisp, and refreshing. So in 1992, when I suddenly had long blonde hair, this guy told Tim he was thinking of writing a web browser for the X Window system, which would allow it to run on a lot more Unix machines. Tim said, good idea. So he made a new browser called, what? Viola! That's right. No, you've never heard of it, right? Yes, Viola. It added exciting new features such as tables, embedding web pages in other web pages, a scripting language to add interactivity to pages, a syntax for style sheets. All in all, a huge leap forward, but it still only ran on Unix, so all of those features just hit a big brick wall and never survived past Viola, unfortunately. Fast forward to 1993, when I had become the single most awkward organism on the planet. And the Legal Information Institute at Cornell had made the first website about law. And lawyers were like, it's a Unix system. I know this. Just kidding. They were like, lol, what? So then this guy was like, JK, I made a browser for Windows. And the lawyers were like, hype. And this new browser was called Cello. Get it? Viola, cello? Yeah. That's right. Cello was the first web browser for Windows 3.1. This changed everything. The web caught on like wildfire overnight. Hey, web browsers, steps forward if you're historically relevant. Yeah, not so fast, Cello. Sorry. At the NCSA, the National Center for Supercomputing Applications at the University of Illinois, birthplace of HAL 9000, these guys, who were students at the time, developed a web browser called Mosaic. That's right. Mosaic. Now, that was a legitimately big deal. Like Viola, it was a graphical browser for Unix. Unlike Viola, it was very quickly ported to other operating systems, including Windows and Macintosh. And it was relatively easy to use and install, and that was crucial as there were more people interested in getting on the web than ever before. In some respects, the evolution of the web actually took some steps backwards with Mosaic, because whereas Viola added formatting via style sheets, keeping presentations separate from content and structure, Mosaic just added a bunch of new HTML elements. That brings us to 1994, when my nerdy friends and I still had hair, those other three jerks still do, and the information superhighway was all over the news. Anderson Cooper told all us high school kids about it on Channel 1. And it was time for people to start figuring out how to make money with it. So back at the NCSA, where Mosaic was developed, remember them? Yeah? Spyglass was a for-profit spin-off of the NCSA. They existed for the purpose of commercializing technologies developed at the University of Illinois, and they began work on a commercial version of Mosaic. At the same time, however, Mosaic's original author graduated and started a company, taking most of the Mosaic team with him. He called it Mosaic Communications until the NCSA called and was like, the Mosaic name's ours, buddy. So they gave their new version a code name, suggesting that their browser was the Mosaic Killer. The Mosaic Killer. The Mosaic Killer. The Mosaic Killer. The Mosaic. That's right, Mozilla. Hey, Uncle Dave, I've actually heard of that. All right. Yes, Mark and his buddies adopted Mozilla as their mascot. But the browser itself ended up being called what? Good guess. That was much later, but the same people. Netscape! Did you say it? Well, yeah, right. But you got to say it. You got to say it at the right time. Yes, Netscape Navigator was released in October of 1994, implementing a ton of new features and very quickly rendering all other browsers irrelevant. So irrelevant that developers started inspecting the user agent string that gets sent with a request. So remember the little arrow going from your laptop to the cloud? So along with the URL, it sends a user agent string identifying the browser and the platform. This is the user agent. This is the user agent string for Netscape 1, Mozilla. So what would happen, since we didn't have JavaScript or anything to sniff on the client side, those back-end jerks would write their scripts so that it checked to make sure it was Mozilla before it would even decide to send it back to you. They thought they knew better than you did whether you could request that thing. So they would sniff for that. Spyglass, meanwhile, was licensing. You remember them from the University of Illinois, right? The original Mosaic people. They were licensing their version of Mosaic to who? Not Paul Rudd. Microsoft! Yes, player 3 has entered the game. Yep, Microsoft put a team of 6 to work enhancing Spyglass Mosaic and giving it that Microsoft flavor. Which brings us to 1995, when my hair reached its maximum strength. And I apparently did a cover shoot for Young Republicans Quarterly that I've forgotten about or something. Turtleneck Guy's other company made a movie about toys, Alanis Morissette was ticked off, and Bill Gates and his start menu were masters of the universe. So Bill and his pals at Microsoft were ready to show their fork of Mosaic to the world. You know it as... Everybody now? Internet Explorer. A miserable pile of garbage called Internet Explorer, available in the Microsoft Plus companion for Windows 95. IE was pretty much just Mosaic dressed up like Windows 95 at that point, but the Netscape folks had been busy adding loads of new features. Internet Explorer didn't even support tables in the first release. They didn't even have that blue E icon yet. They had this sad thing, and they just labeled it the Internet. And seriously, forget what you know about IE 11 and Edge. The first 2 releases of IE had no redeeming features whatsoever. But everyone would just use the browser that was on the floppy that their ISP provided, which was virtually always Netscape anyway. In fact, Microsoft's user agent string reported itself as Mozilla, with the truth in parentheses, so it wouldn't get ignored when folks were sniffing the user agent string. And guess what? Every browser still does that. This is what they look like these days. They all still begin with Mozilla, just in case some of those ancient pages are still online. Now they also all claim to be WebKit. They all claim to be KHTML. They all have the word gecko in there, just in case you're sniffing for that. That's Firefox and friends. Most of them even say Chrome and Safari now. This is the one for Edge, as it happens. But they all do this business. Sniffing for user agent strings is not a good way to decide what content to serve, folks. Detect features, not browsers, because otherwise you would have to keep updating them constantly and would have to know about every single browser on the planet, and it's just not a responsible thing to do. Don't do it. I know you were promised JavaScript. You're getting bored. We're getting there. Just bear with me. So we're in 95, right? When Generation X was the absolute worst instead of you guys. Don't worry, they've been doing this forever. Look at that. Killing America's soul. Laid back, late blooming, or just lost. So don't take it personally. They do it to everyone. Well, anyway, 95 was the year that the web became available to mere mortals. And the commercial web was a very real thing. Amazon and Yahoo launched. CNET launched with a yellow sidebar that every other site on the web decided to copy. Seriously, you have no idea. That thing was everywhere. Everyone was like, oh my gosh, a yellow sidebar. I must do this too. Yeah. It took a while for that to go away. Heck, in 95, they were even making movies about hackers. The web was everywhere. Boot up or shut up. Online this fall. See, these marketers, man, they're hip with kids and their lingo. That's right. Pretty soon it was parkour everywhere. Always trying to keep on top of this stuff. So, 95, the web was everywhere. They were even making movies about it. So it was about time to make people afraid of it. We had to come up with a reason. Who will think of the children? There have been a lot of Time magazine covers in this slideshow, so it's good to know that 20 years later, we can still count on Time for super relevant, hard-hitting news like 15 awesome ideas for how to eat chia seeds. But anyway, back to the days when they were throwing cyber in front of everything. Web developers, which was suddenly kind of a real job, were asking how to add interactivity to their pages. Hypertext was neat and all, but there were new tricks like tiled background images and GIFs, but, animated GIFs were clearly a fad and have no place on today's internet. The web monkeys wanted to add interactivity beyond hyperlinks. The answer came in the form of plugins like Java Applets and QuickTime VR and Macromedia Shockwave. Incredibly, Shockwave is still maintained by Adobe, and even more incredibly, the Space Jam website is still online. So we had interactive content, even games in web browsers, but interactivity via browser plugins was a pretty poor experience. The plugins had to be installed, they were a security risk, they were painfully slow, the downloads were huge, and they couldn't actually interact with any of the HTML content on the page. But a team of scientists at Netscape were hard at work on a scripting language that would run directly in a browser. Okay, well, they weren't really scientists. Okay, it was one guy and he spent a whole 10 days on it. But by golly, he did it. What was it? You guessed it. It was named after coffee because they wanted it to be like that other thing. That's right, Mocha. Right, yeah, because that's what this guy, hey, remember him? Mosaic and Netscape? That's the name that guy's boss suggested. He really wanted to remind people of that other hot new platform named after coffee. But a few months later, before it was really released, in September of 95, they came up with a better name. And finally, we had LiveScript. Okay, that name didn't stick either. And a couple months later, Netscape worked out a licensing deal with Sun, which had created the trendiest new platform in town, Java. And thanks to this trademark licensing agreement, which confuses people to this day, Netscape could call their new language what? JavaScript, despite having only the most superficial of similarities to Java. In any case, JavaScript now existed and could be used far and wide, or at least as far and wide as people were using the latest version of Netscape and had it turned on in their preferences. But by golly, it existed. And because that wasn't confusing enough, when Microsoft reverse engineered it a few months later and added it to Internet Explorer, they called it JScript. They weren't going to mess with Sun. They didn't need any gosh darn trademark licensing agreement. So you with me so far? Clear? All right. So over the next year, an organization called ECMA, that's the European Country Music Association. Oh, I'm sorry. The European Chamber Music Academy. My bad. No, it's the European Cylinder Manufacturers Association. No. Étude de conception de machines automatiques. Mais oui. No. Okay, this is getting silly. It's obviously the Electronic Collar Manufacturers Association. All right. I know. We have stuff to learn. It's the East Coast Music Association. Canadian music, East Coast style. That's what I'm talking about. Okay. ECMA International, European Computer Manufacturers Association. Anyway, those guys over the next couple of years worked on standardizing JavaScript. And they called it ECMAScript. So for the last 20 years or so, ECMAScript has been the official standard of which JavaScript is the primary implementation. When we talk about the standard, it's ECMAScript. When we talk about the language, it's JavaScript. Now that we've got our name straight, what could JavaScript do? HTML could define the content on a web page and its structure and some basic presentation, but JavaScript could dictate behavior. It was a real programming language. You could do real programming with it. You could use JavaScript to create additional HTML on the page even. Have it write out some HTML for you. What? Crazy town. You could put a calculator on a web page. A calculator on a web page. Can you imagine? This is still online. You could make images change by hovering your mouse over them. Bonus points if you had no idea what they linked to until after you hovered. This is not online. I found this buried on an external hard drive where it can no longer hurt anyone. I don't know what it was doing on my external hard drive. I don't know anyone who would make something this terrible. If you're a bank, though, with a ridiculous skeuomorphic website design that looks like an ATM, I can't imagine who would design something so tasteless, then you could also offer not just a calculator, but a mortgage calculator. Yeah, sorry, this is also on an external hard drive where it can't hurt anyone. But it was there. And besides calculators in the ever-popular mouse over images, you could do stuff like form validation to check the input before they submitted it. It was and is a great way to give people instant feedback without a round trip to the server, but does it eliminate the need for checking input on the server side? Heck, fire, no, it doesn't. Don't forget to do that. If you're ever tempted to validate only in the browser, think again. Nevertheless, client-side validation was great. But as with any new technology, there were those who would use it for evil. Yes, with JavaScript, the pop-up ad was born. Gee, thanks, JavaScript. Yes, everything was terrible. The web was becoming a nightmare. Not just because of pop-up ads, but because an increasingly large number of sites only worked in one browser on one platform. You see, in those days, Netscape and Internet Explorer didn't just compete on user interface features. They each added their own non-standard HTML elements and other features. IE had Marquee. Netscape had Blink. Our lives were enriched. Competition had fostered such innovation. No, it was terrible. Both had significant market share and had developed wildly different object models. IE had document.all, Netscape had document.layers. So if a site did anything so much as add a pull-down menu or something like that, it probably had to be written twice. Welcome to the first browser war. If you were cool, you put nifty little buttons on your site to let people know what browser to download. Aside from different APIs for JavaScript, each browser also had major features that were just plain absent in the other. And once Internet Explorer 4.0 was bundled with Windows, it quickly became the single most widely used browser. But at least Spyglass was getting paid, right? Since it was based on Mosaic? Nope, just kidding. Since Microsoft bundled it with Windows for free, they didn't have to pay royalties. They did get sued and had to settle for like 8 million lousy stinking dollars. But anyway, Internet Explorer began to dominate and introduced its own new features, such as ActiveX. ActiveX allowed native compiled Windows code to run right in a web page. That obviously opened up a lot of possibilities as long as you were willing to abandon every non-Windows user, which a lot of businesses were perfectly willing to do. The web was starting to become just another delivery mechanism for Windows code. And thanks to the fact that Outlook Express, also included in every copy of Windows, used the Internet Explorer engine to display messages, email could run native code. What could go wrong? Lots of crap went wrong, and computer worms did billions of dollars in damage. And sometimes just previewing a message was enough to wreck everything. What were we talking about? Yeah, ActiveX, right. So Why did companies use it since it broke the web and was catastrophically insecure? Well, ActiveX did offer some enticing behavior, including one really neat thing that would eventually catch on and be adopted by other browsers, albeit in a pure JavaScript form. It was called XML HTTP request, often shortened to XHR, and it made its debut in Outlook Web Access with Microsoft Exchange Server 2000. It allowed a web page to get additional data from the server after the page loaded without refreshing the entire page. Despite the name, data was not limited to XML. It really had nothing to do with XML. It was just a mechanism for asynchronous requests. There's that word, asynchronous. You may have heard of this by a different name. In 2005, Jesse James Garrett of Adaptive Path wrote a blog post about an application design paradigm using XHR, and he called it, what? Ajax. In those days, we still had to deal with wildly different syntax for Ajax across browsers, and even basic operations that dealt with the contents of a page. Using JavaScript in those days in combination with HTML and CSS was sometimes called DHTML. And there were libraries that managed to work in all the major browsers at the time. Then, as now, supporting earlier versions of Internet Explorer was the hardest. But Microsoft was finally talking about adopting standards, but old versions were hanging around for a painfully long time. By that time, we're 2005 now. Netscape usage had thankfully dipped below 0.5%. And Firefox, which was a Netscape successor of sorts, but designed from scratch to implement standards, was rising fast. Still, those DHTML libraries were kind of necessary if you wanted to write things that ran everywhere. And they were pretty awful to use, and awful for users as well, because they were huge, huge libraries that had to be downloaded with every request. But it was the best we could do for a little while. Thankfully, 2006 brought several new JavaScript libraries that handled cross-platform compatibility in a much more pleasant way, including Ajax. And that was still 11 years ago. New challengers have since arisen, and they all do their best to implement standards and to keep themselves up to date. They even have nice built-in tools for developing JavaScript, as we will see. HTML5 offers new APIs that we can use with JavaScript to do some new things as well as to do some old things faster. And JavaScript itself got a major overhaul with ECMAScript 2015, aka ES6, and it has continued to improve since then. And we're not going to be messing with ES5 or earlier in this class. We're just going to make the executive decision that we're using ES6 and newer. So we're going to live in the happy new world in which we can write modern JavaScript. So you're welcome in advance. We have about 1 million libraries and full-blown frameworks these days that let us build fancy JavaScript apps. Old versions of Internet Explorer continue to haunt us a little bit and remain the hardest thing to support because there are still a shocking number of computers running Windows XP. And Internet Explorer 8, released 7 years ago, was the last version to support XP. And those who never updated past Windows XP Service Pack 1 are still stuck with IE7. IE7, in fact, IE period, earned a bad enough rap that Microsoft dropped the name entirely and now calls their browser Edge. But all the modern browsers are pretty okay for our purposes. We'll be using Chrome in class because Seth and I are most familiar with its developer tools, but the projects we build ought to work on the latest version of any of the big four browsers. So while no one knows for sure what the future holds, the future of front-end development looks pretty bright. It's taken a while to get here, but it's a pretty exciting time to be creating things for the web, and JavaScript has never been better. Are you with me? Woo! Just John. All right.